Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this fourth session in our GCEI discussion series. And for folks who are new to this series or haven't been engaging with us in a little bit, GCEI is Grassroots Community Engaged Investment. We'll kind of give a little overview of what we mean by that at the start of this discussion, and then we'll really be digging into some good Q&A from the audience and from us, having a good discussion with our speakers who I'll introduce in just a moment. Quick housekeeping, again, sorry about the link with the name. Andrea just chatted to the group, so please feel free to change your name if your name is Andrea Armeni. And yeah, we would love to have this discussion be as face-to-face as we can make it, given the technology. So if you want to have your video on, that's great. If not, we still definitely encourage you to be participating in the chat and by unmuting yourself later on when we have the open discussion. And please feel free to ping the whole group for questions. We'll be kind of picking out as many as we can answer or discuss as we go. So I just want to keep that reminder out there that we definitely want this to be open as possible and really engage with all of you. So thanks for coming, and we'll get started with a quick introduction to our speakers and a recap of this discussion series so far. So Andrea, you want to move the slides forward here? Great. So we have a bunch of speakers from 3 organizations today. Really excited to be having this discussion really from the perspective of folks who are doing this work on the ground of building investment projects that are centering the voices of their communities and the decision making over those investments. So we have 3 amazing organizations here today. The Boston Ujima Project, we have Nia Evans and Johnny Charles from Native Women Lead, who are also engaged in the Co-op Capital Project. We have Vanessa Roanhorse and Jaime Gloshay. And from the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, we have Ojan Mobedshahi and Annie McShiras. And all these folks are going to introduce themselves in just a little bit and tell us a little bit more about their work. So definitely stay tuned for that. Really quick, let's go on to just a quick overview of like where Transform Finance is coming into all this and the work that we've done so far together. So we have this term, grassroots community engaged investment. And what we mean by that is it's really a process and practice of investing with input, decision-making power, and or ownership from grassroots stakeholders, which really can be grassroots organizations, residents of a given community, any person that is not a usual investor but has a stake or a tie to the kind of investment work that is happening in that community. And so we had a report come out early this year that did a lot of research and talked to folks, including the projects represented on the call today, but also several others who are doing this work in lots of different areas of the economy, from enterprise investment to housing investment to commercial real estate. There's a GCEI lens that can be applied to all different kinds of investments. And really the nuts and bolts is what we want to get into, and some of the expectations and relationships that are needed to make this work happen. And as a quick recap of the past couple of sessions, if you want to move the slides, Andrea, we first talked a lot about this notion of building power and how having folks who are impacted by an investment, participating in shaping that investment, can be a real opportunity to bring new voices into the conversation, build longstanding relationships that help movements on the ground gain power and leverage over shaping all sorts of actors, not even just investors, but local governments and other community organizations, and building strength for ongoing advocacy campaigns. This all kind of has this power building lens that we really want to center in all this, and that makes these kinds of investments different than the kind of business as usual community development or impact investment work that a lot of us are In the second webinar, we talked a lot about some of the specific models that are out there, so the different kinds of projects and how they are shaping their governance to meet the goals of what those community organizers and community stakeholders are trying to achieve through the project. Looking at different governance models from really big democratic community-based models of democracy to kind of small group leadership with some grassroots organizations taking the helm and everything in between. And then last time, a couple of weeks ago, we had our philanthropy-centric session where we had a few guest speakers from foundations talking about how they support this work and how philanthropy as a whole really needs to move in this direction if they are to center equity in their place-based investments, and why that's something that is really important to happen right now, and a little bit of how to get there from that philanthropic perspective. So if you're interested in revisiting any of those conversations, definitely check out our website. We have all the recordings up there where you can also sign up for the future sessions. So with that, we're really excited to get right into it with the speakers that we have today and the projects that they are representing. Like I said, we have Boston Ujima Project, Native Women Lead, and the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. So what we're going to do is to have each group kind of have 5 minutes to introduce themselves and give a quick overview of their organization, the goals of their work, how their project is different than business as usual, and who is kind of involved in their decision-making process that gives it that kind of democratized capital lens to their investment. And for the speakers, I'm gonna copy all of those things into the chat just so you have something to look at, because we're actually gonna take down the slides and have it be in that discussion mode. So yeah, we can take down the slides, and we'll start with the Boston Ujima Project. We have Nia and Johnny here. So Nia or Johnny, you wanna take it away?
Sure, thank you, Kurt. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nia Evans. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Executive Director of Boston Ujima Project. It's a pleasure to be here. Transform Finance is a great peer, partner, supporter of ours. So we really appreciate this report, really appreciate this work, and just the continued work that Transform Finance does to inform the field. I'm gonna, so I should say, number one, both Johnny and I talk a lot. So we're kind of going back and forth over who should get the 5 minutes, and it's gonna be me, and I'm gonna try to be quick and then just try to hand it off to Johnny, just introduce himself really quickly. I do also just want to acknowledge some friends that are in the room. So in addition to being here with Transform Finance, we're very happy just to see some friends. So I see Deborah Fries here from our sister fund, Boston Impact Initiative. See Tila Troge, who I want to give a shout out. Tila Troge is a member of and a tribal attorney with the Shinnecock Nation, doing great work with that tribe in the Hamptons in New York. So just encourage you to look up what's happening with the Shinnecock tribe in the Hamptons. I see Julia Dundor from New England Grassroots Fund. And I see our good friend Carlos Rojas Alvarez from I can't remember the name.
Decolonizing Wealth.
Decolonizing Wealth. Thank you, Vanessa, from Decolonizing Wealth. And then finally, I do see some people in our network, Nora Block, who I recognize as a supporter. Just want to acknowledge that. So Ujima Swahili for cooperative work and responsibility. We are Black-led, member-driven arts, finance, and business ecosystem. We're multi-stakeholder, multiracial, multi-class. I would say, in short, our goals are to create and to provide a mechanism for community members, including ourselves, to directly impact planning, development, and investment in our communities, as well as provide a wealth building vehicle such that we can resource our own needs as we understand them. In terms of governance and decision-making, we are democratically led. Every Ujima voting member in Ujima has an equal vote on the businesses, real estate, and other community initiatives we invest in. Those investments are businesses, real estate, and community initiatives that are not only owned by working class people of color, but also have positive social impact for working class people of color. And I will leave it there. I hope that that is enough to continue this conversation on, and I will pass it to my illustrious colleague and teammate, Johnny, who will impress you with his brevity. Thank you.
Listen, I need to replay that later. Thank you, Nia. And thank you all. It's a pleasure to be in community with you all. There was no way I could name off the different organizations and individuals in this space. So thank you, Nia, for lifting that. It is also a testament in terms of how we operate and move, which is focusing on relationship and making sure we deepen those relationships. I think there was one piece that probably wasn't lifted in terms of how is our project different in terms of the from business as usual. Nia had spoke to the piece, one of the mechanisms that we use to transform our communities, lift the voices of individuals within those communities that are directly beneficiaries of decision-making, is this mechanism of voting. And so there's voting in every aspect of what we do. All our decisions are steered by our community. And so when we talk a little bit more about investing in small businesses, that's our prime and jewel, is making sure that the individual interests are lifted and the individual needs are also complemented as well as we invest in the small businesses in our community. We can talk a little bit more about that later. Thank you again for the opportunity. And I think that was brevity enough.
Well done.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny, and thanks, Nia. I was impressed by the brevity. Even though we are having these introductions be brief, definitely encourage folks, as you're hearing the introductions from our three project speakers today, to kind of come up with questions, or like if you have anything that comes up that you want to hear a little bit more on, we'll have plenty of time for that in the discussion afterwards. So feel free to put stuff in the chat or just kind of keep it to yourself for now, and we can have a space to answer those later. So thanks, Ujima folks. I'm going to pass it off to the Native Woman Lead speakers here. We have Vanessa and Jaime. So if either one of you want to kick it off, go ahead.
Sure thing. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, Kurt and Andrea. Happy to be in community with you all. My name is Jaime Gloshay, and I'm a co-founder of Native Women Lead. We're an organization that supports Indigenous women entrepreneurs. We've been convening since 2017 and has since convened over 1,000 Indigenous women representing over 100 different nations. So this is our hard work that we get to do. And my background, I actually used to work at a CDFI developing out the Native American lending program. I met my colleague, Vanessa Roanhorse, in the local ecosystem here. And we kind of locked arms to kind of figure out how do we fund Indigenous women entrepreneurs, Native entrepreneurs, but doing so in a way that is in the lens of equity and intersectionality with gender, as well as being very mindful of how colonization and how economic exclusion has affected our communities. We bring a very different lens because as Indigenous people that are part of sovereign nations, there are some legal, I guess, challenges and barriers that limit us from building assets and building wealth, as well as leveraging assets and wealth in our communities. So people often don't know is we don't own any of our lands. We're actually stewards and in relationship with the U.S. government. So it's very hard as far as access to capital in our communities. I'll let Vanessa go in a minute, but I just want to do a quick overview. So we get to work on a capital project with Musenda Credit Union, and that's been such a neat project because we get to design out the antithesis of the 5 C's of credit, which we feel are very exclusionary to our people and most unbankable and unbanked folks here in this country. And we get to design a product with 11 pilot organizations that serve a multitude of diverse communities to show that we are worthy of capital, we're worthy of investment, and that we are not risky, actually. So Native Women Lead, as one of the pilot organizations, has taken on the opportunity to really design this with a gender lens, as well as thinking in our way of rematriation and what it means to support Indigenous women in our community. So it's different because, like I said, it's the antithesis of the 5 C's, the typical underwriting criteria. We have a really awesome bank and CDFI that we get to work with that kind of lets us drive the ship in a way. And then we also work with investors and funders that have really honored this actually. And how grassroots stakeholders are involved is they actually design the underwriting criteria of who they fund. So we work primarily based on relationship. And that's another thing we're testing is how is relationship or character-based lending the new model for the future. And V, if you want to go ahead and just add anything else.
Thank you. Hey everybody, Vanessa Roanhorse, Gannett Navajo from Navajo Nation on Tiwa lands today. As Jaime mentioned, we're very excited about Co-op Capital. It's a micro lending program at the moment. And we've actually used this initiative to kind of get some receipts, right? Like part of the issue is that everyone wants to do impact, but when it comes down to it, the questions of how are we measuring risk? What defines risk? And then also, frankly, like what is the return on investment and or like what is success? And so with this micro lending program, I will say for the whole collective of all of the 11 partners, we've lent out over $1 million to 200 individuals across New Mexico.
We can do that for dinner.
And in that process, even during the pandemic and post, like where we are today, we were 0% default, post as of, or at least this current moment, we're around 2.5%. And these are Native American entrepreneurs, undocumented immigrant communities who would never be able to walk into a financial institution to access resources. What we are measuring, which we'll get into later, is for us at Native Women Lead as part of this work is, were you cared for? Did your confidence change? You know, and I think those are much more interesting questions than just the return and or as we continue to think about impact, who is it for and what story are we trying to tell? So I just bring that up because as of this moment, you know, we're really proud here in New Mexico to see what's happening. I think what's cool about Native Women Lead and what we're doing though, is we're taking this micro lending program and we're building out a fully scaffolded initiative that will go from 2 to 10,000, 10 to 50,000, and 50 to 250,000, continuing to utilize character-based lending practices. The only thing I'd add about what makes this so different is, and this was difficult, is we didn't ask, we just did. And we're very grateful for an opportunity to talk about how important that is, but also to know that for us, this is a constant learning and it's very emergent. So thank you so much. We look forward to talking some more.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Jaime, for sharing a little bit more about all the work that you're doing. It's really incredible, and we're so happy to have you here. So last but not least, for our third group that we have on the line today, I'm going to kick it over to Ojan and Annie to talk about the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative.
Thank you, Kurt. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to first say I'm so honored to be here as a part of this panel with Native Women Lead and Boston Ujima, two really inspiring organizations that I've been, blessed to be connected with, and hoping to continue those partnerships as we all grow as emerging organizations, really forging new paths into the unknown here. So my name is Ojan Mobedshahi, Finance Director at East Bay Prec, and I'm joined by my colleague, Annie McShiras, Investment and Fundraising Director. I think I'm going to do most of the talking for this first 5 minutes, but then we'll share the questions and discussion as we go forward. Calling in from Ohlone Territory in Oakland, California. East Bay Prec was really born organically out of the need for a more sustainable housing access structure for people of color in the East Bay. It was actually born out of the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network, which was a grassroots, just sort of Facebook group and listserv that was created. And they actually went to this law center, the Sustainable Economies Law Center, a really amazing group in Oakland, do work all over the country, really. And the law center, instead of helping them create an LLC, which was sort of like the original idea, was to say, hey, have you considered creating a cooperative? And that launched a couple years of community meetings, which I joined back in 2017, just as a volunteer member, to come and check out what's this discussion going on that my friend told me about around this housing cooperative, new structure. And then we officially launched in 2018 as a multi-stakeholder cooperative. And we have 4 types of members. So we have investors, we're similar to an investment cooperative. We have community members. Anyone from the East Bay can join for as little as $10 a year and become a co-owner of the cooperative. And then like a worker cooperative, our staff are also owners, and all the residents in our properties also have the opportunity to become owners in the cooperative. So it's really integrated multi-stakeholder structure where each type of owner has different rights, responsibilities, financial obligations, and patronage. Our board of directors is also either elected, the various positions are either elected by our member body or appointed by 3 different local BIPOC organizations. And we really put that in here so that our local BIPOC like leader organizations can retain membership on the board, even if our member body in 20 years down the road switches. We want to make sure that there's always going to be BIPOC representation on the board in a really meaningful way. A little bit about what we do differently. As I mentioned, our community members can join for as little as $10 a year. And they, out of all the members of the cooperative, have sort of the broadest reach. They get to elect the most board members. They also, they participate on a regular basis, day-to-day basis, by providing feedback and making proposals to the cooperative, to each other or to the staff. And the staff carries out a lot of the day-to-day work. They can also bring items to the all member meetings. Let's say even if there's a conflict between members and staff, they can actually bring that up to a member meeting, and then it's a member vote. And they could even choose to fire staff if we're not doing the will of the people, so to speak. And I just want to also say this is a practice that's in constant development, and we're still figuring things out. Having launched in 2018, we now have over 100 community members, which is a lot of perspectives to handle, and a complicated democratic process to facilitate. So we're definitely constantly working to figure out and improve how we can integrate community voice into our work. Another thing that we do differently is around like non-extractive returns for investors, right? We target a 1.5% rate of return, which is similar to like a CD, or actually now it's even higher than a CD, but we were sort of aiming for move your money out of your savings account, which is making no interest, and putting it into EV-PREC. We're not trying to compete with the stock market, but we're also providing like huge social returns, right? Where else can you invest in, in keeping if you're moving into a new city and you're a gentrifier, how else can you actually invest financially into the stability of your neighbors? So that's really what we're trying to do. And, similar to, I think, what some of the other folks have talked about, de-risking these frontline communities who don't meet the 5 C's of credit, can't get their own loans. EV-PREC can work with them and use our legal structure to qualify for those loans or raise the money ourselves, or all that combination of creative capital raising. And we also provide the other side of like non-extractive returns is we provide the same investment opportunity to everyday people and accredited investors. You don't have to be accredited to invest in EV-PREC. Anyone in California, and I think now 12 or 13 states across the country, can buy a $1,000 share, or you can buy more. We launched back in 2018 just with the California exemption that allowed us to sell 1 share per person, but we really recently qualified for a direct public offering, so we can sell more than 1 share per person. And regardless of how many shares any individual investor owns, they still only get 1 vote. So whether you buy 1 share or 100 shares, you still only get 1 vote at our member meetings. And the investors actually have the least voting power out of any other categories, because we want the community members, the $10 a year level folks, to actually, who are from the community, to be able to make the decisions about what's going on, while allowing the investors to have some say as well, but not a majority say, and not based on how much they invest. And the last thing I'll mention is that we also, we do a combination of residential and commercial space, because we recognize to create the futures that we want, we need good housing, but we also need jobs for our people and our culture. So yeah, excited to share more, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ojan, for sharing a little bit more about East Bay Prec. So I want to move on to a bit of like a Q&A, and I have some questions, but definitely folks from the crowd, feel free to drop stuff in. We can kind of address them as we go. being mindful that we have a lot of perspectives here, and we definitely want to make sure that we're getting answers from all of our speakers here. So I want to start us off by asking a question about what you all have learned in this work that you would want to share with someone who is interested in getting involved in this kind of work. And I know that all three of the projects here are a little bit different in the angle or the area that they're working on, whether it's real estate or enterprise or individual lending, and all going about it in unique ways that are reflective of the communities that you're serving and your local environment. So if there's something that could be helpful for someone getting into this and trying to go through that same process that all of your projects went through in terms of figuring out how to set it up so it was like really working for your people, what would that be? And that could be based on something successful or a challenge, roadblock. Kind of leave it up to you all. And I'll ask that, and then I'll also say in the chat there's a question around the grassroots governance and asking about how the community members are actually participating. I think each of you touched on that a little bit, but as you go, if you want to touch on that briefly, that would also be great just to answer that question. So let's hear from all three of the projects. I can give the Ujima folks the first mic just because you went first on the first go round. But yeah, we can kind of jump from there.
Sure, thank you. And Johnny, I think I want to tackle the learning piece and have you grab the community member piece, and then of course add what you'd like to add onto the learning. So the first thing that comes to my mind with the learning, I would say for us is less of a learning, and more of an understanding that we came into the work with that I think has been affirmed. It continues to be affirmed. And is something that we are sure to mention with other individuals and orgs who contact us to learn about our model and to think about what it looks like to do something like Ujima there. And that is to focus on and center relationships. And so I think we're probably going to talk about this a little bit later. I kind of feel like Vanessa maybe even gave a preview of that in talking about how impact gets measured at Native Women Lead. But definitely we really want to try to kind of preempt the instinct to think, for example, that you'll look at all of the pieces of Ujima's model and then take it and kind of import it to where you are, or learn about our process, and then just kind of repeat the process or derive some type of formula. So I think one of the first things we're very careful to talk about is to understand that Ujima does not exist absent its very local context. So Ujima exists on top of really impressive informal organizing infrastructure that we take here for granted because we're in it. But then when you go to other places, then you kind of start to see where there are some resources that we have here in Boston that do not necessarily exist in other places. So definitely not absent a pretty research or the context of a resource-rich environment, a long history of organizing, and then as I've said, this informal infrastructure. And I think some interesting work is happening towards formalizing or organizing infrastructure more. So that's important. And part of that informal infrastructure is the set of relationships that exist. So Ujima's conception arose out of a study group effort that was convened by Center for Economic Democracy, which is our fiscal sponsor, Boston Impact Initiative, and I named Deborah Fries is here from Boston Impact Initiative. And incidentally, we've gotten a lot of learning from Boston Impact Initiative. Our very cool fund design is heavily based on theirs, and City Life Vida Urbana, which is Boston's premier housing justice organization. At the time that I learned about Ujima, I was the ED of the local branch of the NAACP, as ED of the Boston branch of the NAACP. And that study group effort that I was not a part of, as I said, was convened by those three organizations. And so there were respective networks that were coming with those organizations. There are about 40 different individuals or representatives of organizations that participated in that. And so there was a layer of trust, again, because of that history of organizing that was there. And so some of the things that many kind of groups and organizations have to deal with regards to formation, we didn't have to deal with that. We already trusted each other. So even by the time I entered the process, I was already in relationship with CED and City Light Vita Urbana, for example. And so that's one of the first things that we talk about is who's there? What do you have? What does it look like? How do you all relate to each other? How does it come together? And so really doing that mapping. And then of course, no one can do it themselves. So we've had a couple of lone individuals kind of come with this notion of what they are going to do as singular individuals, and we're clear a singular individual is not going to pull, I think, any of these projects off. So really, again, kind of mapping the relationships, and then where there are gaps, paying attention to how those gaps are filled and how trust is built is important.
I think the other question particularly was how grassroots organizations are involved. And I feel like you answered some of that already, Nia. But just kind of spell a little bit out in terms of the different ways that folks can participate with us and co-learn and work with us. There are a number of different ways and approaches that we take. And first and foremost, this sense of like one person can't do it alone is an unlearning that I had to learn. So I think I didn't really give my background as somebody from the CDFI space in doing lending, but I think in the CDFI space, there's this misconception that we don't do business as usual when we do. So this idea of practicing the 5 C's, in the CDFI space, you actually do. There might be a caveat to which C that you adjust, but it's still the 5 C's. And so with that being said, my learning was really kind of, wow, individuals really kind of self-govern at Ujima, and what does that look like? And so we have member teams, different teams that represent different bodies of the work that really support the organization. And Nia kind of spoke to this sense of there was an existing community before she got there, and there was this developed trust. And we bank on that in terms of really providing trust to individuals who are willing to work together and be a part of a lot of the work that we do. And so in those member teams, individuals as a group are self-governed. And so there isn't necessarily one person who's leading, and we're not necessarily depending on that one person. I think there are some individual learnings that happen where one person does try to take on some of the work. But I think there's the collective work, the collective learning happens in a sense of what happens when they're not there. And so we're continuing to learn what that looks like. But for us, the guides and auspice that our individual member teams work from is the self-governance. And so we have representatives from grassroots organizations and different organizations that are in partnership and peer with us that serve on some of those committees, but they're open to our members, open to the general public, but mainly, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Nia, but mainly for us, the intention is really having our community be a part of those member teams and lifting some of that work. Another area are other governing aspects of the organization. So there's our community standards committee, I'm looking at Dia because I will take 2 days to explain this because it's just fun to do. But our community standards committee are comprised of generally individuals and organizers throughout I would say mostly the state, but primarily locally in Greater Boston, who developed what we call the 36 minimum business standards for our expectation of good business practices, which is really centering employees, the broader community, as well as some broader initiatives as we serve on different coalitions. And so this particular group really supports the voting in of the individual businesses that I was going to say make it through, but are nominated by our community. And so we can talk a little bit more about that, but I feel like I can go on and on about what that looks like. But that's one of the groups that, or one of the ways that grassroots organizations can play a role. The other group that we hold is investment committee. Where we have different individuals that represent the different bodies of work, different skill sets that provide recommendations for how we invest in our small businesses. And so oftentimes, when we're talking about lending, we often talk about a credit committee or a loan committee. And the decision to invest in a small business is limited to that particular body. This is not the case. Our investment committee helps lift our work in terms of really kind of supporting how we're thinking about the deals, how we're thinking about structure. And there's a colorful conversation in terms of how can we look at this differently, and are we holding ourselves accountable based on the expectations of our community? But they provide a recommendation in terms of where are this particular business strong, where are their weaknesses, where are their opportunities, particularly by SWOT analysis and more. And we provide that recommendation to the broader community before we cast a vote. So those are the different opportunities that grassroots organizations can play a role in. And obviously, if we continue talking, we can share a little bit more.
Sure, and then if I could just add just really quickly, just community members, because I think there's just a question about community members. So just a couple of things really quickly, just in terms of our community standards, those are hard. So it could be tempting to kind of think of them as their guidance. We like businesses to do them, but it'd be okay if they didn't. That's not the case. So for us, our community standards, our 36 community standards, they're minimum non-negotiable standards. A business cannot receive investment from Ujima without meeting those 36 standards. So just really want to make sure that that point gets across. And then finally, just in terms of our members and community members, we have two broad tiers of membership. We have a voting membership and a solidarity membership. Voting members are members who live in Boston proper, the city of Boston proper. Solidarity members are anyone who live outside of Boston. So if anyone's familiar with the Boston or the greater Boston area, cities like Cambridge and Somerville, for example, would be included in greater Boston. That a person living in Cambridge would be a solidarity member. And then finally, just to say, in terms of their role, Johnny talked about the member teams, but in terms of governance, very similar to EB-Prex. So similarly, investment amount does not dictate say. If you are a Ujima voting member, you vote on what we invest in. You are not required to be an investor to vote. You can invest, that opportunity is available, but you are entitled to vote as a voting member.
Awesome. Thanks, Nia. Thanks, Jaime. Really awesome as always to hear about the evolution of your project and how folks can get involved and how that was all set up. I do want to pass it off to some of the other speakers and bring back to that question of like something that you've learned that you would kind of relay to someone else getting into this work, as well as that question of how your community members are involved in the governance of capital. So I can pass it back to Vanessa and Jaime, and then let's hear from EB-Prex as well.
Okay, thanks so much. So I just want to say what we learned is you have to center community first and foremost, and that's what we're learning with the Co-op Capital model as well as Native Women Lead. Co-op Capital is actually born from a food co-op called La Mantanita that approached New Sender Credit Union, and they were looking at how they were going to fund their small business suppliers. And that's how it was born. And this current, I guess, generation that we're working with, we are very intentional about ensuring the borrowers are centered in the model. So we have a financial institution, philanthropy investors, funders, and then we have 11 partner organizations. And then we have us that we're capacity managers, kind of like weaving together all of these stakeholders. And at the middle is the unrepresented borrowers. So we try to ensure that data and evaluation is collected and there's consistent feedback loops in that model. And then Native Women Lead, what we actually did, because Co-op Capital honors the wisdom and the knowledge and the expertise of the partner organizations, is we actually just ran with it. We took our core values, we created a committee that's representative of our community. So Native women entrepreneurs were on that committee to decide who would get loans based on our core values. And we implemented what our community was saying, because we do a lot of research on the ground with our community. We were able to say like, okay, this is what's fair, this is the interest rate, this is like what the amount of loans, like the loan sizes people need. And that's how we designed out our program. But now what we're learning is there's a lot of financial trauma in our communities, and we're actually now being very intentional about the programming that we move forward, is that financial trauma is woven into the design to continue to advocate for care for our communities. And B, I don't know if you want to add anything as well.
Thanks, Jaime. Yeah, and just to help maybe a little bit, because I realized we didn't explain, Jaime and I both work at my company called Roanhorse Consulting, who's been working with the credit union and a bunch of financial intermediaries to figure out how can they leverage their back office, their resources, and their millions to billions of dollars of assets to actually do the work of supporting community members who want to build this type of capital capacity. So we were really excited that they wanted to bring Native Women Lead on, and of course, Native Women Lead, being who it is, took the tools and have run with it, and really modeling out the opportunity here. The other things I'd add is like, when we started this, both at Roanhorse Consulting and Native Women Lead, the biggest challenge and barriers is all the things that you don't know because you're organizers and you're on the ground doing the day-to-day, the hardest work. So much of what we had to do, which I like to consider for myself baptism by fire, I learned a lot of this by just being in the meetings, being in the rooms, meeting other folks like all of the speakers today, and just asking the questions you're asking us. The things I want to also add is that, like, when we started this, we had to understand not only the landscape of what was happening in New Mexico, we also had to build relationships and strong relationships using data that we had to create ourselves, but also linking arms with a lot of local grassroots organizations to try to come up with some commonality, some themes of what are the same challenges we're all experiencing. We all wanted to also honor our cultural uniqueness and difference and not just be BIPOC. We wanted to truly kind of represent of who we are and why we're doing this. The other is understanding who in the ecosystem, intermediary, financial institution, et cetera, was truly mission aligned. And some of that is because whether you decide to start your own fund with a new entity and build it out from scratch all the way up, which I think is incredible, and that's true power building there. Or you can find a partner like we did with the credit union to say, look, we are creating an ecosystem and building these capital innovation products at the same time. It is really hard to do all of this. So if you can find a like partner, I think there's a real opportunity. The other piece here is right now, CDFIs as a national network are trying to figure out how to do better. A lot of CDFIs we've seen kind of just replicate the same banking standards, the same banking underwriting processes, which continue to perpetuate the challenges we're seeing with the 5 C's of credit. For us, it was really imperative that we said, we don't want to continue to perpetuate the current systems that's broken and doesn't support us. So we've really been able to push with this character-based lending. Like I said earlier, we finally have the receipts. It takes a long time for people to believe us. We have to not only be excellent, but we have to show how excellence can be measured. And so for us, it was really critical to understand what is it we wanted to measure and why. Why did we have to redefine risk in our own way, in our own language? And what partners were out there that were willing to take the challenge with us? The other side, and I know someone wanted to know about how do we continue to fundraise or make this sustainable? The truth is, we don't always know. So much of this is about justice, and justice isn't a sustainable business model right now. We are fighting constantly to prove why this work is so necessary. So when I think about sustainability, I push back, and Jaime and I push back, because the question is like, for who and for what? Is it sustainable because we need to have a strong business model when we are, 500 plus years behind on the economic growth and wealth building opportunity? Or is it sustainable in the sense that, like, right now, philanthropic dollars are the fastest and probably most agile capital we can rely on. However, if we can get those resources, that allows us potential capacity, not only grow our own wisdom and knowledge keeping, create new measurements of success, identify new products and vehicles that can move within the current systems to allow us a little bit of time to think about the future systems, but also allows us to think about policy advocacy and where these decisions are ultimately getting made. I guess my whole piece on this is we are learning, or I am learning in real time. And what I hope for in this work is that all of the hard learnings and hard head hitting the wall situations that we're going through means that the next cohort, the next group that's coming up to create funds doesn't have to do this again. But it has to be centered through our worldview, for us Indigenous worldview, and it has to be done through a lens of what is return on the investment when we think about planet, we think about culture, we think about safety. Those are measures we also really work hard to consider. So I'll stop there because I know the East Bay team has a lot to share.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I couldn't resonate more with a lot of what you're saying. Thank you so much. I'll try not to repeat what other folks have shared. So some of the key learnings that pop up for me are like circling back to the basics and doing it often, especially when you're trying to like create a culture within your organization, within your members, that's not the dominant culture, which is what I think we're all trying to do. You've got to constantly remind yourself and remind your whole community of what those new practices are. So one example of that is, and in response to one of the other questions, we don't do consensus-based decision-making, we do consent-based, which is like a slight difference, but it basically means not everyone has to agree 100% to decisions. But if somebody objects and the objection threshold is pretty high, it's like you think it takes us off mission or it's going to cause irreparable harm. If you object, then it stops the decision from happening. And the reason we do that is because with more than 100 members, we don't think we're all going to be able to agree on every little thing 100%. But as long as nobody objects, we want things to be able to move forward. And we can try them and we can always reverse or change our minds later, right? But we often forget that that's what we do. And our members are often like, or our staff as well, myself included, often act as if we have to all agree 100%. And that's a process we have to keep circling back to. And even on a big picture, like if you're starting a new organization, and I still consider ourselves new, even we've been around for 3 years officially, revisiting your vision often, because you're going to start new partnerships, build new relationships, get a lot of new exciting projects. And then if you don't revisit your vision and decide what to maybe cut or what to postpone, you're going to have way too much work on your plate and burn out. So we've found that often revisiting the vision often, not setting 5-year goals, set 6-month goals and come back to it can be really helpful to stay grounded and bring your team onto the same page. I've also just wanted to share that being in a co-op has been like spiritual and like personal growth work. It's sort of easier. Well, I don't have a boss right now, but I imagine it's easier to have a boss and blame them for your problems and then go home and separate everything, instead of having to really work everything out and build deep relationship with all your colleagues and like work through all your conflicts in a real way. So that's an important part of being in a co-op, but it also feels like a really valuable part of being a human in the way that, I'd like our whole world to be. In terms of member participation and votes, like I mentioned, we do consent as opposed to consensus. So we don't always like go around and do a vote to get everyone's attention. We more often make space for dissent, to make space for if folks have objections, along with making space for questions and feedback. And so while we do have an annual member meeting, and we could have more often member meetings, but on a minimal, an annual member meeting where we do bring things to a vote, like voting on our board of directors and any other items that come up. We have monthly community owner circles where our community members can attend. We provide updates, we provide sort of questions, solicitations of feedback, and sometimes vote on certain things. But again, it's mostly a space for folks to provide feedback and objections, and a space for community members to bring their proposals forward to the group. I think we're going to be creating a more and more formal process to like facilitate folks to bring proposals, because again, that's not a part of our dominant culture. We have to create that for ourselves and reinforce those practices. And then, yeah, really can't emphasize more what Vanessa said about asking the questions, like take time to ask the questions, because there's so much to learn, but also everything is made up. Like all the systems that seem so in place, somebody just made that stuff up, and we can make up our own systems as well.
Love that. Thanks, Ojan. I know we're rapidly approaching 2 p.m. here, so I want to just keep it going with another prompt that we've actually discussed as a group in our prep call earlier about this idea of expectations. I think it came up in the context of hearing about replication, this idea of, can your model work elsewhere? And I just want to hear each project's reflections on maybe some of the expectations that you've kind of heard or experienced from others that you want to maybe challenge or at least kind of reframe it a little bit based on your experience. And yeah, we can just leave it at that. I'll start with the East Bay folks if you want to take it, and then we can go backwards just to distribute that, and let's try to be as succinct as possible since we have that 2 p.m. end time.
Sure thing. Annie, can I give you the mic on this one?
I knew you would ask me to do that. Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm EB Prex, Investment Director. And yeah, this question of scale and replication is one that we get all the time. And it's a challenging one because, we're pioneering an entirely new model of doing real estate development that is deeply engaged with community and, is not top down, is really grassroots led. And it's hard work just to make it work here in Oakland, let alone like replicating it out to other places. So I think, we have consulted groups and advised groups who are trying to spearhead similar models across the country. And, talked with groups that are looking to do something similar in their community. We've gotten a lot of really great traction nationwide, folks that are really fed up with traditional affordable housing models that are not working and are not listening to communities and what communities really need. And so, we do a good amount of that kind of work to help replicate our model and help others, do the same thing in their community. And, like I said, the permanent real estate cooperative model is new. We pioneered it with the support of the Sustainable Economies Law Center in 2017. And so, we're kind of building the road as we travel, to quote Mondragon and the Zapatistas. And so, yeah, I think we are constantly trying to refine our model and evolve it and make it work better for community. And so, the replication thing is something that we can do with grassroots groups. The scale question is one that, we really want to make it work in our local community first before it scales and, gets bigger and bigger. And I think the scale, the question of scale is one that is like deeply capitalist and one that, is one that we've been socialized to think is good and always best. And I think that's something that I'd like to just push back on a bit and say, what works best for community? How can community be being engaged and involved in what they need? And then ask, okay, is scale what they need? If scale is what they need, then let's do it. But if it's just scale for scale's sake, we're not interested in that.
Thanks, Annie. I'll pass it back to the Native Women Lead folks, and we can hear from Ujima on that one. And feel free to also answer as questions are coming through as we go.
Yeah, all of the things that I think you were saying is right. Like, it's a question on like, why scale? What does scale mean? Who is scale for? And I think from our point of view, scale is not the goal of what we're building. What we're building is what we'd like to think is the infrastructure to support us, but other future fund builders, other future capital creators and innovators to be able to tap in, learn from, and create the solutions for themselves. I think it's inherent in how we have to think as Indigenous people, because just in the United States, there's 574 federally recognized tribes, 300 plus non-federally recognized tribes. We have to have a plurality of thought, and we don't need everything to be the same, and we don't want things to be the same. I think that's the issue we're facing today, is there's only one worldview, And we only have these very limited handful of structures and processes to move resources. And the truth is, we need more people creating more nuanced products and programs and opportunities, in my opinion, that we can all then collectively share as a field and as a community of people who are building place-based strategies for power. I think there's things nationally that are coming about, whether it's through the American Rescue Plan, or I had put in the chat, really looking at things like the SSBCI program from the SBA, and like how can those resources be tweaked and motivated to not just be for venture capital, but to actually be for real people capital. But you know, that's the collective work in our communities and where we are. I'm not looking to replicate our fund. Our fund fits because of it's for Indigenous women, by Indigenous women, investing in Indigenous women. It's not going to fit for everyone, and that's okay. Hopefully, though, in this process and this work, we're able to seed and plant more community members ready and excited to do this. And we also do it in partnership with folks like who are part of this panel. As they build, we build. And I think that's the collective power I'm looking for. And yes, I would say pioneering is a strange word for us. We're not interested in pioneering anything. We're interested in actually holding ground. And what I would say is returning back to create what we need to make for the future, because all of our people and communities had this before. So that's kind of, I think, where we sit. And I don't know, Jaime, if you want to add more on the scale or replicability. I know we only have a minute. Oh my goodness, sorry, Realist East. No, go ahead.
Let's hear from Nia and Johnny on this, and I think it's okay if we go a couple minutes over, but yeah, want to pass the floor.
Sure. So I think it's been said. So I think what I would want to offer probably is just more of a philosophical or ideological take, and to just say, and in the sense Vanessa did this already, because I definitely don't think there needs to be kind of a replication versus no replication frame, and I believe I heard you say that, Vanessa. But really an invitation, challenge for people to examine what you think you're asking or talking about. When you ask, is this replicable? How will this scale? What is it you think you're asking? Because, and I think this refers to just Ojan's point earlier, it is definitely, I think, a remnant of this sense that we came into a pre-existing system, which we didn't. So we are operating in a system that was created, and there are underlying beliefs, philosophies, and ideologies that underlie that. And so just not being so quick to think, well, this is the convention, this is the way you do it, these are the right questions to ask. Because I've definitely been in rooms where I'm not even sure a person even knows what they're asking, but it seems like that's the question to ask. How will you scale? So what do you really mean? And again, Vanessa said this, and why? Why are you interested in scale? Why are you interested in replicability? And then just to underscore Vanessa's point, if you've determined you are still interested in that, then does it really make sense for the community or the region or the locality that you have in mind? There are some places where it makes sense. There are some reasons and rationales that make sense, but it definitely should not be regarded as an across the board convention that should be automatic. So we definitely are very comfortable pushing back against this all the time. Our funders know that I definitely personally don't believe in models. So for a while early on, we were talking about Ujima as a model. We don't say Ujima as a model anymore. We do feel like we can answer a scale question. We have a $5 million fund right now. Our next, if we do well with this one, we're thinking we're going to have a $25 million fund. So that's one way we can answer it. It's not the only way. And then when we think about replicability, again, I've heard both Vanessa and Annie say this, we're not interested in, is there a Ujima in a different city? But we just want to, when we think about replicability and even scale, not necessarily vertically, but laterally, we think about, Are people sufficiently inspired? Are the communities that we care about, working class people of color, are they sufficiently inspired that they do something that's reminiscent, that's recognizable? And I think the piece that I want to pull out from that is what Vanessa opened with, which is we didn't ask for permission. So where I would say we can say there's been some success is if I can look around in other locales and see, oh, wow, there's an initiative that a group of community members decided to just go ahead and do. I would say there's been some scale there. There's been some replicability there, but you're not seeing models, you're not seeing clones, you're not seeing twin images, for lack of a better term.
Thanks so much, Nia, and thanks everyone for all those. What ended up being the closing comments, but I thought that this was a really, really like apt way to end this conversation and talking about, you know, looking outward and seeing all these other folks who are looking to the projects like the ones we have on the call here, Ujima, Native Women Lead, EB-Prec, and trying to figure out how that could work. And I think the theme throughout all those comments is that, you know, there are there's no rules necessarily, and it's kind of up to us, up to people on the ground to really figure out what that looks like. And I know for us at Transform Finance, it was really that kind of mentality that really inspired us to try to figure out what's going on here and try to bring folks to the conversation. And just to say that, you know, there's 3 projects represented in the speakers here. I know that there's a bunch of other folks doing this work in the audience here, and it's happening, you know, all around us. And I think that we're really seeing this like amazing moment of trying to reconsider these notions, like the 5 C's of credit, like what a loan looks like, what a fund looks like, who needs to be involved. And I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to be with all the folks on the quote unquote panel up here, who are really doing this work day in, day out and showing what some of the possibilities are. I know that I've personally learned so much from all of you, and so have we at Transform Finance, and doing some of this research and trying to get folks in kind of this GCEI movement that we are trying to really collect and put out there. So just want to say thank you again for coming today, to the speakers and to the participants. I'm really glad to be continuing this series and having such rich conversations with all of you. Just have to close out by saying in a couple of weeks, on the 28th, as a Wednesday, we're going to be having the next discussion session. That's going to be focused on CDFIs and other financial intermediaries, and we have some really awesome speakers who have been kind of supporting a lot of these projects that are doing this GCEI work. Came up a bunch of times today in terms of, you know, how can we change the status quo and get folks to really reconsider how these community development investments are made. So we'll be digging into that from the CDFI perspective, but really hope that all sorts of folks, whether you're on the grassroots side, funder side, investor side, are really sticking around for these conversations. I think the more types of groups we have in here, the better the discussion ends up being. So I just want to thank all of you for showing up as always. Yeah, and with that, I think we'll close out and stay in touch for some follow-up. We'll reach out soon.
Thank you.